Katie Wilson and you're watching A News. Let's take a look at the headlines. US-Iran ceasefire strains as Tehran denies seeking talks and accuses Washington of violations. Russia launches a large-scale attack across Ukraine as Kyiv urges allies to speed up air defence deliveries. And journalists and diplomats gather in Baku to discuss decolonisation in media. Thanks for joining us. The US-Iran ceasefire is under growing strain, with Tehran denying it requested new talks, while accusing Washington of breaching the agreement through renewed strikes and sanctions.
Tensions between Iran and the United States are rising again, with both sides disputing whether diplomacy is still on track and Tehran accusing Washington of breaching their June agreement. Iran denies asking for new negotiations, rejecting a claim by the US president that Tehran had requested further talks. It has also dismissed reports that another round of negotiations could take place in Switzerland next week. Tehran says it only agreed to receive a regional mediator to discuss the latest developments, insisting any formal diplomatic movement would be announced through official channels. The dispute follows renewed American strikes and a declaration from Washington that the ceasefire is over. The US military, however, says there are no new operational announcements and has declined to speculate about further action. An American official says strikes have been deliberately followed by pauses to limit escalation and leave space for diplomacy. Iran has meanwhile accused Washington of repeatedly violating the 14-point memorandum signed in mid-June. Tehran says recent attacks breach provisions calling for an end to hostilities, while the cancellation of licenses linked to Iranian oil sales and the introduction of new sanctions violated commitments on economic relief. Iran's parliament says the country remains ready to defend itself should the United States abandon the agreement. Regional mediation is continuing, with Qatar and Pakistan attempting to bring both sides back to the negotiating table. Qatari representatives have held talks with Iranian officials, while Pakistan has urged all parties to restore calm and comply with the memorandum. The agreement was intended to establish a permanent ceasefire, ease sanctions, reopen the Strait of Hormuz, and halt fighting across several regional fronts.
Large rallies have taken place across Houthi-controlled areas of Yemen in a show of support for Iran as tensions across the Middle East continue to rise. Demonstrators gathered in Yemen's capital and across more than 14 Houthi-controlled provinces, condemning US strikes against Iran and backing the group's latest military warning to Saudi Arabia. The statement threatened airports, ports and other critical infrastructure over alleged violations of Yemeni airspace. Houthi officials warned further military action could trigger a broader conflict. Well, tensions over Iran's nuclear program spilled into the UN Security Council, where members clashed over whether sanctions linked to the 2015 deal remain in force. Mitch McCann reports from the United Nations in New York.
Well, the meeting in New York focused on sanctions related to the 2015 Iran nuclear deal. But even before the meeting began on Friday, the Council had to vote whether it should even take place. China and Russia voted against holding the meeting and have argued that the requirement for a committee to update the Council expired last October, meaning there was no reason for it to be held. But most Council members believe that sanctions on Iran remain in place, and at the UN, the major powers cannot veto procedural matters, so it went ahead with the majority of countries voting in favour. Now, members were briefed by Rosemary DiCarlo. She is the Under-Secretary General for Political and Peace-Building Affairs. She said that the International Atomic Energy Agency noted a significant deterioration in its situational awareness after the US and Israel attacks on Iran. Now, she said the agency has lost continuity of knowledge across all of Iran's declared nuclear facilities. Now, the meeting came amid renewed tensions between the US and Iran in recent days, and America's Deputy Representative, Ambassador Tammy Bruce, told the Council that Iran's leaders have a historic opportunity to transform their country, but her remarks came with a warning. She added, if you shoot at civilian objects or ships, we will respond, obviously addressing Iranian leadership there. Now, Russia's representative spoke of what Russia's mission to the UN calls the Council's anti-Iranian approach, saying that members are blaming Iran for the nuclear deal falling over rather than the US pulling out of it back in 2018. China urged the US and Iran to filter out distractions and come back to the negotiating table as soon as possible. Now, while Iran did not address the Council on Friday, in recent months its ambassador has demanded that the UN not remain silent, and its ambassador also in recent months has attacked the US for what he has called America launching missile strikes against Iranian cities, bombing schools and killing children. Mitch McCann for A News at the United Nations in New York.
Qatar is deepening its engagement with Syria as Damascus accelerates efforts to rebuild regional and international partnerships. The latest diplomatic moves come at a pivotal moment, with Syria seeking to expand cooperation following recent shifts in its global standing.
Syria and Qatar have signed a new memorandum of understanding to boost cooperation in diplomatic research and training. The agreement was finalized during high-level talks at the Tishreen Palace in Damascus, bringing senior officials together to reinforce bilateral ties. Syrian Foreign Minister Asiyad Hassan al-Shaibani met with Qatar's Minister of State for Foreign Affairs Mohammed bin Abdulaziz al-Khulaifi to review bilateral relations and coordinate on regional developments. Beyond the technical scope of the diplomatic agreement, the talks focused heavily on expanding future cooperation across various sectors. The high-level meeting comes just days after the US initiated procedures to remove Syria from its state sponsors of terrorism list. Qatari officials welcomed the decision, describing it as a vital step toward reintegrating Syria into the global financial system. The discussions primarily focused on the country's post-sanctions economic recovery and reconstruction efforts. Doha remains the fastest Gulf nation to restore ties with the new administration in Damascus, following a 13-year freeze. Moving forward, both sides emphasized their commitment to maintaining close coordination on shared regional interests.
China is bracing for Typhoon Bavi with the highest rainstorm alert in force and mass evacuations underway. That's ahead of expected flooding and landslides. Abuhaya Jafarova has the details.
China's National Meteorological Center has issued a red alert for rainstorms, the highest level in the country's 4-tier warning system, as Typhoon Bavi is expected to make landfall along the eastern coast early Sunday. Forecasters warn that several regions, including Zhejiang, Fujian, Jiangxi and Anhui, as well as parts of Beijing and Hebei, could see torrential to extreme rainfall over the next 24 hours. In some areas, rainfall is expected to reach several hundred millimeters, significantly increasing the risk of flooding and landslides. Authorities have already stepped up emergency measures. In Beijing alone, nearly 96,000 people have been evacuated from more than 36,000 households ahead of the heavy rain. The capital has already experienced intense downpours, with the heaviest rainfall recorded in the suburban district of Pinggu. Officials say reservoirs across the city remain below critical water levels, while emergency services continue to monitor conditions and prepare for further rainfall through the weekend. Residents in affected areas are being urged to avoid unnecessary travel, stay indoors where possible, and closely follow official weather advisories as Typhoon Bavi approaches China's coastline. Abuhaya Jafarova, A News, Beijing, China.
2 people have been killed and 19 others wounded after Russia launched another large-scale missile and drone attack across Ukraine. Kyiv is now urging allies to speed up promised air defense support. Ukraine's Air Force says Russia's overnight assault included ballistic and cruise missiles as well as over 100 drones. 11 people were injured in Kyiv, while strikes also hit Odessa and Kharkiv. Meanwhile, Ukraine says it is continuing to pressure Russian military logistics. Ukrainian drones struck 21 fuel tanker vessels and 7 cargo ships in the Sea of Azov overnight, bringing the total to 76 vessels hit this week. Well, European Union member states have failed to reach an agreement on a 21st package of sanctions against Russia, meaning the proposed measures now remain stalled. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen confirmed the draft targets key sectors, including energy, financial services and fisheries, but it requires unanimous approval from all 27 nations. Diplomatic sources indicate the current deadlock centres on lowering the price cap for Russian crude and restricting EU entry for individuals who served in the Ukraine conflict. Well, joining us now to discuss the latest in the war between Russia and Ukraine is Yulia O'Connell, member of Dignitas. Thank you for joining us, Yulia. Now, what more do we know about those overnight attacks across Ukraine?
Well, thank you for having me. If we start talking about overnight attacks, as you know, it's another 100 drones, and it's usually barrage attacks. So it comes with the ballistic missiles, comes with the cruise missiles. The biggest problem that Ukraine does not have right now enough Patriot missiles to intercept missiles, Russian missiles. So. Ukraine did develop a very good capabilities to intercept Shahed drones with much cheaper drones, but the missiles do remain a big problem.
And how is Kyiv responding to this? We're seeing videos, images of a fuel crisis affecting Russia currently almost across the country.
Well, Kyiv responds with the alert. Everybody's getting alerted a lot. The night before the big attacks happens, there is multiple chats and
Apologies there to our viewers. We appear to have lost our guest. I'll keep you posted if we're able to get that connection back. But for now, we are going to move on to some other news stories. As climate pressures grow across Central Asia, one country is introducing sweeping new rules aimed at cutting emissions, adapting to climate change and preparing businesses for a lower carbon future. Fariza Kalimurzina has the details.
Kyrgyzstan has become the first country in Central Asia to adopt the framework climate law. Signed by President Sadir Japarov, the legislation sets out how the country plans to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, adapt to climate change and move towards carbon neutrality. This is not just an environmental issue. Kyrgyzstan is the source of many of Central Asia's major rivers, which makes climate change closely linked to glacier loss, agriculture, water security and hydropower. The law also brings the country closer to meeting its commitments under the Paris Agreement and the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. It places Kyrgyzstan among a growing number of countries that regulate climate policy through dedicated legislation. Similar frameworks already exist in the European Union, Moldova and Ukraine. The changes will also affect large businesses. Companies will be expected to monitor greenhouse gas emissions, submit climate-related reports, and take climate risks into account when planning their operations. For export-oriented businesses, many of these requirements are already becoming standard on international markets. The law will come into force on January 1st, 2027. Before then, the government will need to bring existing legislation into line with the new rules. Fariza Kalimurzina, Almaty, A News.
We're going to return to our guests now, discussing the latest developments in the war between Russia and Ukraine, as that connection does seem to have been resolved now. Yulia, lovely to have you back. And we were just discussing the fuel crisis that is affecting Russia. Could you talk me through that?
Well, yes, that's if anyone actually has followed Telegram channels or seen video on X, there's multiple reports from the Russian people who stay in lines for hours, many hours, sometimes overnight, and in a tent, and still not getting gas. So that's as a result of Ukrainian deep strikes onto the Russian oil refineries, Russian oil production ports, as a result of capabilities that Ukraine developed in terms of deep strikes. Now Russia sees the results where they have such a shortage of gasoline that they stopped export and looking to have import from India and China, and use the shadow fleet to transport that. And of course, Ukrainian armed forces do not sleep. They use what we call kinetic sanctions. If political sanctions do not necessarily always work as well as we wish, kinetic sanctions, meaning hitting the tanks, the logistics, seems to be a lot more efficient and effective.
Now, you're discussing sanctions there, and obviously we've had that EU sanctions package that's been stalled. What do you make of that, and how effective do you think that sanctions package could have been had it have been approved?
Any sanctions would be helpful. The problem with all of kind of sanctions is how they've been implemented. Who is responsible for stopping the fleet, the shadow fleet? Who is willing to take these actions? Does British government willing to do that? Yes. Does Italian or any like Portugal government is given the opportunity willing to do it? Is who is going to implement it and how effective is to implement it? But sanctions is always a good signal that Europe is still standing with Ukraine and standing strong. However, Ukrainians really get used to in the past 5 years of full-scale invasion to rely on their own capabilities, and striking and deep strikes, middle strikes, a lot more effective sanctions. Middle strikes that cut the logistics are by far more effective right now. We wish they would pass. Brussels, unfortunately, is not at the front line. They're not feeling the threat as much as, for example, Baltic states or northern Finland, Norway. So that's unfortunate, but I think with the further development, eventually it will be passed.
Now, our viewers are just looking at some images of that fuel crisis there that's taking place across Russia. Some outlets are looking at that and saying that it appears the war is shifting against Putin. Do you think that's a fair analysis of the situation, given the damage that we've just seen across Ukraine overnight?
Well, there is a big difference, and we have to look not only what happens in Kiev, because Russia is basically using the tactic of terrorizing people, hitting the hospitals, schools, buildings. Ukraine is using a tactic and strategy to deplete Russia of the funds to finance the war and to destroy logistics. Like, for example, with the middle strikes, which is 80 to 120 kilometers, and right now being used extremely effective to cut down Russian logistics into Crimea, which Crimea has been used heavily as a military base. So when we look at the ground, it does look like Ukraine is suffering. It is. Ukraine is suffering. But Russia, the war shifted into the Russian land and shifted not only in terms of depleting funds to finance the war, but also psychologically, because right now Russian people have learn that how the sleepless nights look like when they're not even attacked on the their cities are not attacked, but the production facilities that close to their cities. Moscow's seen that. We've seen Moscow burning all around. So did you get an idea? And that's where the Russian people start saying and start thinking, oh, maybe we should stop it. Maybe we should stop the war.
Thank you very much, as always, Yulia, for coming on the programme and for providing your analysis. It's much appreciated.
Thank you.
Now, Afghanistan's women-led aid groups are facing a funding crisis, putting vital protection and healthcare services at risk. Tamim Bahis reports from Kabul.
Here in Afghanistan, women and girls depend heavily on humanitarian organizations for protection, healthcare and other essential services. But a new report from UN Women says the organizations providing those services are now facing a severe funding crisis. Afghanistan is among the countries covered by the UN survey, alongside several other nations facing major humanitarian crises. The report says that globally, at least 1 million women and girls lost access to life-saving support over the past year because of donor funding cuts. Nearly 9 out of 10 women's organizations surveyed say they can no longer meet the level of need despite growing demand for their services. For Afghan women, the cuts are especially serious because women-led groups can often reach those other aid group organizations cannot. The UN says 40% of the organizations surveyed could temporarily or permanently close within the next year. UN Women say every dollar withdrawn from these organizations means less support for displaced mothers, survivors of violence, and girls excluded from education. Here in Afghanistan, aid groups fear that further cuts will leave already vulnerable women and girls with even fewer places to seek protection and assistance. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A-News.
An international conference in Baku has brought journalists and diplomats together to examine how former colonial territories can reclaim their stories and strengthen local media voices. Leila Rahimli has the details.
An international media conference on media and decolonization organized by the Baku Initiative Group. The event brought together journalists and diplomats from several current and former colonial territories. The discussion centered on how these regions are represented in global news and the specific challenge local media face on the ground.
As a result of the activities we have carried out over the past 3 years, we have brought these issues to the attention of international organizations, not only on a political level, but across various directions. Currently, the UN institutions, the non-aligned movement, and other international organizations are increasingly including decolonization issues in their agendas.
The initial session focused on how local media outlets can challenge legacy colonial narratives and address the lasting effects of foreign administration. Participants discussed the direct role local journalists play in reshaping historical perspectives.
We use African languages, we broadcast in African languages. That's our way. And so all the strategy is to deconstruct all the speeches that make Africa and Africans look like they are colonized. So everything that deals with colonization, we bring social sciences, academics, politicians who are able to deconstruct this kind of speeches.
Later in the day, the focus turned to the role of modern journalism in safeguarding local heritage while trying to engage with international readers.
For the past few years, the media in Senegal have adapted to the culture of the most widely spoken language in the country, Wolof. Senegal is on track to successfully decolonize these dominant narratives, at least regarding our language of work.
The final part of the forum dealt with the practical and structural difficulties regional media outlets face when trying to independently report their own stories. Participants also evaluated the contribution of international platforms like the Baku Conference in addressing these obstacles.
The whole world tell the story they don't know about Africa. So I guess this is the time that Africans can tell their own stories with their own voices. Let the local people tell their own stories. Their voices are valid and their stories are valid.
The event wrapped up with the adoption of a final joint declaration by the participating delegates. That's all from us. This is Leila Rahimli with Natik Mammadov for A News.
Health officials are struggling to contain the Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo after the World Health Organization said 4 out of every 5 new cases cannot be linked to known patients. The WHO says the lack of traceable contacts is making it far more difficult to stop the virus from spreading. Almost 1,800 people have been infected and 625 have died. That's according to the latest government figures. The agency warns the true number of infections could be 2 to 4 times higher than reported. Authorities are now training 21,000 community health workers to help identify suspected cases and encourage people to seek treatment. To sport now, and Norway's famous Viking row has arrived in Miami ahead of the World Cup quarter-final against England. The Viking row has become synonymous with the 2026 World Cup, with Norway supporters bringing the celebration to Miami Beach ahead of the quarter-final. It first went viral before Norway's opener against Iraq and has since spread from bars and public transport to stadium escalators and even Norway's parliament. England, meanwhile, head into the clash after their dramatic last 16 win over Mexico, but must cope without suspended defender Jarell Quansah. Come on, England. Now, and finally, the Bayeux Tapestry has returned to UK soil for the first time in over 900 years for what's been called a once-in-a-lifetime exhibition. The artefact, which depicts the 1066 Battle of Hastings, is to go on show at the British Museum in September. Tens of thousands of tickets to see the 70-metre tapestry have sold in advance of the events. French President Emmanuel Macron has loaned the item until July next year to mark long-standing relations between France and the UK. The tapestry, which dates from the 11th century, marks the Norman military conquest of Britain. It's believed to have been sewn by nuns in England before being transported to the northern French town of Bayeux, where it has stayed for most of the last millennium. That's all from us for this weekend. Stay tuned to A News for all of the latest updates and enjoy the rest of your Saturday.